Thank you very much, Sue, for the wonderful introduction. Yes, I was born and raised in Uzbekistan, and I started work last century, as I say. And I pretty much worked for every single big news organization, mainly for the BBC for 13 years, and I'm freelance for CNN, for Al Jazeera, for Channel 4 News. And lately, my work was based in Prague, where I helped to set up the Russian language channel Nastoящее время, and I worked as a reporter there too. So I worked in Israel and Palestinian territories, including Gaza, in Lebanon, Somalia, Nagorno-Karabakh. I've lately been to Afghanistan, and a year ago, me and Evgeny Afinievsky, the director who is here, we made a film about Syrian war. Before that, I was reporting on Syria for a news channel. So I just want to show you a little promo of myself in different places so you understand what I'm doing. It's not because I love me on TV, it just will give you a better idea of what is it like to be in a conflict zone.
Я нахожусь в Кабуле, самом опасном городе этой страны по количеству человеческих жертв. Только по данным ООН за последние полгода здесь в результате взрывов смертников.
Амс говорит, что поначалу жители Раки были рады. Она показала мне фотографии на своем телефоне, которые не могли снять на камеру.
Здесь заканчивается та территория, которая контролируется палестинскими властями, а вот там начинают проблемы этого города заключаться в том, что часть его контролируется Израилем.
Называют этот завод в путь.
Это оно село опытное, на линии фронта. Я даже не знаю, чем люди будут утеплять свои квартиры из-за такого холода, потому что земля.
Нужно было добежать, потому что, со всех окон, как видите, они могли вести огонь, потому что это все было изначально их.
Мира, который сообщает, что штат сотрудников безопасности будет увеличен. Телеканал «Настоящее время» представляет новую практику.
Из Кабула отправляюсь в Мазари-Шериф снимать здание аэропорта.
Вижу, как полицейские начали готовиться. Поднимают трубку, проверяют наличие снаряда. У этого человека они отрезали руку, потому что обвинили его. Вот эти вот ямы. Свежие.
Вот мы нашли один.
Нет, я не знал, что это такое.
Эти дома достаточно хорошо выглядящие, если недавно отстроили.
Дверь. Они ворвались силой, разломав дверь.
За решеткой. А к статуе, которая охраняется кордоном,
никто не угрожал. Армии, переместными, коммунистами, левыми.
которые завернуты полностью, есть женщины, которые просто в шортах.
Закон нарушается, а земля страдает.
Thank you. So this is my latest stuff. War reporting or reporting in conflict zones has some glamour around it, because when you see the reporter with the flak jacket and the helmet and behind there's a war activity going on, it's kind of fascinating because we all watch movies. The problem is it's not glamorous. The problem is it's dangerous and people are getting killed. And that's what we as viewers don't realize, that this person in front of the camera with a flak jacket can be shot dead every single minute. And last year, unfortunately, the number of journalists or media professionals being killed in the war zones is increasing year by year. And even last year, you had 81 journalists killed in different war zones, most of them in Syria. There are different dangers in a war zone. It's, first of all, it's a physical danger, because the bullet doesn't choose. The bullet doesn't see you press. The bullet just flows away and you're shot dead. Secondly, psychological trauma for everyone, every single journalist and media professionals who work in war zones. They kind of get inside that reality, and the longer you stay there, the more you're getting used to violence, cruelty, and trauma. And when you get out of that situation, it's difficult to get back to your normal life, because you get used to this. It takes me for about 2 weeks to get back to my normal sense. And the third danger, is the worst danger, is that when you get used to that situation, your reporting is getting worse. because immediately you associate yourself with the side you're reporting from. And that's what I always say. This is your job in a war zone, is to A, to stay alive, and B, to tell the story. Because we're all there to tell the story of the people who live in that area. We're not telling the story about the armies or the armed groups, very rarely. Our job is to tell the story of people who live in that war zone, and that's what it's all about. Unfortunately, unlike in last century, where the journalists or reporters were just traveling with the armies and writing stories or doing news pieces and being like observers, now journalists are becoming the target. And unfortunately, it's very easy and good, probably, for the armed groups, including the regular armies, to hit journalists. Because the moment you kill journalists, you get international exposure, you get the publicity around the world, because we all support each other. B, you kill the voice who is going there to the bad places, risking their life to report on the crimes committed by armed groups and regular armies. And third, you're decreasing the number of people who really want to go inside there and report. So hitting journalists is now the first thing everyone tries to do. And unfortunately, the latest attack on the 30th of April, when in Kabul, the double suicide attack by Taliban happened, 9 colleagues were killed. And the second attack was specifically targeting journalists, which sent a very bad message. There are not that many people who are happy or willing to work in Afghanistan at the moment. There is very small international coverage. And unfortunately, the local journalists are being the big hit. I can tell you different life story situations, because my latest work was in eastern Ukraine, and I was working in the separatist areas as well as the areas controlled by Ukrainian regular army. Because I thought that most of the media was concentrated on the Ukrainian side, so I thought my job is to go and report on how people live in Donetsk and Lugansk and all this, you know, what Ukraine is calling occupied territories, I call it separatist regions. And the danger there that you are in a situation where you are in an unrecognized entity, not controlled by anyone. You're in the hands of these armed groups, or whoever these people are, who can do with you whatever they want. They can take you hostage, they can kill you, they can imprison you, they can torture you. So your job is to make sure that you're in good terms with everyone, and they listen and they watch your reports. I was once in, there was an operation in the city of Debaltseve, which finally got down to the rebels, or separatists. So when I get in there, I was interviewing a local commander of the separatist forces who was a female, and she had 200 soldiers under her command, which I thought quite remarkable, and I was very interested in talking to her. So I enter the room, and her assistant looks at me and says, "I saw you somewhere." And I was like, "There's no way." 10 minutes later, he comes back to me and says, "I saw you on Ukrainian channel." And I was like, "Oh my God, what do I do?" A few seconds, I was thinking I'm going to be dead because I have nowhere to run. There are about 200 people. I'm totally in their hands. And then I look at him, and he said, "Well, you actually were saying good things, right things." I was surprised that it was run on Ukrainian channel. I'm like, phew. Imagine if I was taking one side or another. That's it. So that's why we all have to be very careful what we say, and to be. And the best thing is to stick to people's stories. Go and report on here and there. Our job is very important, because in a situation like war, where people feel, the civilian population feels abandoned, neglected, like it was in eastern Ukraine, and they feel like nobody hears them, nobody is interested in them. Media presence also gives them psychological support. It's also important because, for example, in a city called Avdiivka, which was on the front line during the height of military actions, during the active war, as we call it, it happened that me and my driver, we were roaming around, we got in, and there was shelling every single minute. There were children and women and elderly in town. Seriously, every single minute. And I was absolutely appalled by that. So finally, I was giving an interview to one Ukrainian radio station saying, like, why nobody provides humanitarian corridor to evacuate these people? If these two sides want to fight, thank you very much, go ahead. But please, can somebody think about evacuating those people who want to leave? Thankfully, that big Ukrainian radio station was listened by the government, and the next day they started procedures to evacuate people. So at least we do something good. I can talk a lot about that, but I think maybe you can have questions of practicalities of working in a war zone. One thing I want to share with you is, like, I'm a lone wolf. I don't like working with a big team. Normally, I come on my own, and I hire local cameramen because I believe in the importance of local knowledge. And my safety is totally observed by the driver, because the driver is your main person. He's your friend, he's your bodyguard, he's somebody who is going to get you out of the shitty situation, excuse my word, when it happens. The big news crews like Sky and BBC and CNN, they normally travel with security advisors and in armored vehicles. I never do that, because every time you go with a big group and you have a special car which says press, you immediately attract attention and you become a target, which is not particularly my purpose. I don't like being embedded with anyone. I like to work on my own, because I think the moment you're embedded with the regular army, you are very restricted in your movement, and that it harms the way you report the story. And that is why, yes, I do take a risk, but at least nobody can tell me what I have to do, and I know that I am basically dissolved within the population. I'm nobody. Me and my cameraman, and that's it. So that's about it. As a news reporter, I can't talk a lot, and I can give you lectures, but I hope you have questions.
What do you think about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? I'm from the Voice of Israel. And which features were there in the focus of your attention? Thank you.
I have a long history with that region. First time I came to Israel was in 1999. Was still Oslo working. I was in Gaza at that time, and I still remember Gaza International Airport, and I was flying on Palestinian Airlines from Gaza City to Cairo. In 2000, Second Intifada started, and the whole went downhill. It's a very emotional thing for me, because when I observe as an outsider the role of media in that conflict, it pains me, because I see propaganda from both sides. I see there's no impartial reporting. There is a lot of emotion and unfortunately a lot of propaganda. Every side wants to deliver a message. I'm not particularly happy with international coverage of the conflict either. Working in war environment, I know how it works. And we stand on one side, we see what this side is doing, and we immediately take the position. But this particular thing with Gaza, which is happening now, I knew that media crews are preparing. Everyone knew it's going to happen after the embassy moved to Jerusalem. Everyone knew, everyone went. But my problem is, we have most of the crews on the Gazan side. We don't have a lot on Israeli side. So there is a distortion here, right? And I know that Israeli army does tend to target journalists. But equally, the Palestinian side does too. Because in that particular situation, for Israeli army to target journalists, they have a mission, okay, they don't want reporting. For Palestinians to target journalists, they can always say, oh, Israelis did that. So I can't trust anyone. That's why I really wanted to go myself and see it for myself, because unfortunately, especially with that particular conflict, you can't find some objective information. And it's very unfortunate because media plays such a big role in that whole region. Media charges things. When I was in Palestine and in Gaza and Israel in '99, I saw people talking to each other. 1.5 years ago, when I went to Hebron, and I still remember Hebron when it was one street with two different sides and there were no roadblocks and nothing else. And I saw what happened now. I was like, oh my God, this is a total degradation. Now we came to the situation where the people on Palestinian territories never saw a single Israeli in their entire life. This is not right. Something should be done about it. And perhaps both sides should work on their media coverage of the conflict to decrease the tension, not to increase the tension, and work on finding common grounds rather than exchanging hate messages.
Shahida, спасибо. Я хочу вас поблагодарить за то, что вы...
Shahida, thank you very much. I'd like to thank you for coming to the east of Ukraine and doing your reports. I saw your reports. I'm Andrei. I'm a political analyst from Kyiv. My question concerns the specifics of the Donbass conflict. Is there a difficulty, was there maybe a difficulty in covering the events that you were delivering to the international community? You didn't have a language barrier there, you didn't have a socio-cultural barrier, and that conflict is significantly different from the Syrian conflict or Israel-Palestinian conflict. What's the peculiarity, in your opinion, generally, of that conflict, taking the journalism, the media aspect of it? Thank you. For me, the problem of east of Ukraine, if I may, I'll answer in Russian, is that there were two clearly different sides. Sides covering Ukrainian side and people supporting the separatists. So it was very hard to find some neutral median line. After Maidan, after the annexion of Crimea, naturally, emotions were high, and it all impacted how the Eastern Ukrainian conflict was covered. And of course, the quality of journalists there, is really failing there. Somehow, journalists today decided that they should take sides, not just going there and covering what is out there. So when I first went to Eastern Ukraine, to Donetsk, it was very important for me to see what is actually happening on the ground. And back then it wasn't that hard. Although officially I was for Radio Freedom, which was considered to be enemy radio station financed by the Americans, but they allowed me to enter, they allowed me to work. But the difficulty of working was that the Russian journalists were given full access. So all the commanders of the separatist battalions, Motorola, Givi, they would always take the Russian journals because the Russians show clearly the precise pictures that they want. Now, for the Western media, it was hard to get there, but thanks to the fact that I don't have the language barrier, I'm kind of one of their own. I managed to find common grounds, but it let me do my work. My work was to just not just telling how hard it is to get access. No, my job is to tell people how hard it is for the people. There were some unpleasant situations when I was for 3 or 4 hours held in the cold in Donetsk, but everything was alright. It was armed people. Everyone's nervous. Very often on some preparations, let's put it that way. You have to be very careful when you talk to them. If you talk carefully, you don't fall under the emotions, you don't scream, then said that you're just a proper person doing your job, and they let you go. So that's how I developed this video of the Donetsk airport. It was very important for me to show the two sides. Unfortunately, in Ukraine they don't show the other side. They don't show how hard it's for people, although the Ukrainians, they are citizens of Ukraine. That should also be understood. And it was very important for me to put together people from the two sides, find soldiers from two sides who were in the same airport fighting each other. And in this film, they got to meet each other. I'll be honest with you, I was very lucky because there was no such hard delineation. I had to move from Donetsk to Konstantinovka to cover these people. despite the fact how terrible they are now, late Givi and Motorola. But you have to find a way to find the common language with everyone. My task is not to judge anyone. My task is to listen to everyone. And when you come from that position, and when you sit them down and you talk to them, they do talk to you. They tell you their story. And that's important for the people to hear. Not how they run around with their machine guns. They see beasts. We all see that. But no, they sit down and they talk like people. And they talked of terrible things, but we did get to hear them. It's important, Ukraine. We could hear both sides. People from the Ukrainian side were telling this story. They talked of things as well, and it was very important for me for both sides to talk. Thank you, Svetlana Schultz, Sararka TV channel. Thank you very much for being here with us, and it's a pleasure to see you and to hear you. You know, it's a difficult thing. It's emotions, first of all. Perhaps it's hard. Maybe your first or second, third are different. Maybe what? They're all about pain. It's emotions. How do you handle these emotions? How do you act professional? And how do you get used to it? And how can one get used to the thought of death? Thank you. You know, it's very hard to get used to death. When you see a lot of suffering of people, of course you fall to emotions, but I learned to work like this. I leave emotion outside of my work when I work. My task is to tell the story of the people so that they can be heard. My emotions, my psychological state is of no interest to anyone. It's not of interest to the audience. It's not a story of me. It's a story of these people. So it's their pain that I have to cover. And my task is to stay as neutral as possible and as emotionless as possible, because if I go emotional, it won't help anyone. It's my problem to handle. The psychological trauma that every person goes through when they're in conflict zones, it's different for everyone. It never goes away for good. It will always with you, but it will vary in the degree of gruesomeness. It normally takes me 2 weeks to come to prop me. When with Yevgeny we're doing the film on Syria and we're looking at all that video, looking at video from the Syrian prisons with horrible torture through which people go. That really got to me, although I thought I saw everything, but for 2 weeks I had nightmares. And in the Ukrainian conflict, Andrei, it's not the devastation that you see. In Debaltsevo, when we came there 2 days after it fell, there was no house that had a roof over it. Everywhere there were no roofs. There were such holes there. I thought, in this poor Debaltsevo, how many bombs went in? And just when the car came there, there was an exchange of corpses. When trucks would come from Ukraine, bring bodies of separatist students, and they would give back. You stand there, and they come from the morgue in these black plastic bags. They move these corpses. 1, 2, 3, 30, and all the children there. They're children, no identification, no. So they take these sacks of corpses from one truck to another, and they just throw it. And I looked at that, and I just lost myself. You understand that in that bag is someone's child, and until the time they came to the Dnipropetrovsk morgue when they make DNA test, and there's someone's mother waiting, and that just hurt me. Hello, Shahida. Welcome to Almaty. My question. My name is Nadezhda Novikova. I'm a journalist, president of Turkic Language Journalists of Kazakhstan Union. In any situation, a journalist has to stay neutral, and you've noted that. But today, many journalists take sides. Staying neutral doesn't work for everyone. What's the problem? What's the reason for that, in your opinion? And that's easy. That's just easy to take a side. It's always easier to work like that. But the problem of professionalism is that you shouldn't take a side, because you should realize that you're not doing good to anyone. I was covering problems in Israel. I I just tell a story. This is on this side and this is on this side. I always tell my colleagues, my journalists, the younger generation, don't give a general picture. You're standing there, you're talking, you tell what you see, because it's of no interest where the bombs are coming from. When you're there, no one cares what's the caliber, what's the shell size. No one sees it. It's not our job to tell the military tactics. Our job is to tell people stories. That's it.
To Almaty. My name is Muhtar Singirbay. I'm a professor at the Süleyman Demirel University here in Almaty. I teach conflict reporting. So my question is more practical. What is going on in this industry? How to teach the future journalists? Because taking into consideration the fact that we have technologies, we have civil journalism, and there is sometimes no sense to send journalists from other countries to that country when they have lots of materials, lots of people who want to report from that region.
The quantity of material doesn't mean that it's a quality material, especially with the amount of fake material coming out, because especially the war, both sides want to play information the way it's needed for them. And their job is to spread it across the world. So you have to be very careful in sourcing the stuff. You know, because the civil, I love civil journalism. I do love mobile phone footages and stuff like that, but we also always have to see who it comes from and who originates from and what is there. You always have to verify. That's why I personally don't trust. I'm working at the moment on a documentary film about Rohingyas. It's a Muslim minority in Burma. And there is a lot of stuff going on. I mean, I was given a lot of material to watch. But when I started to verify it, a lot of that was simply fake, manipulated. And I'm not justifying Burmese, but at the same time, my job is to create a proper picture. I always say we have to train reporters properly. We have to train them basics of journalism, which is objectivity and neutrality, and keep you under control. It happens with experience, but it also happens when you have a very good editors to check you, because otherwise it's very difficult. So especially with war reporting, because every word we say and every word we do will harm the situation or will benefit it. So it's extremely, extremely important, I think.
Shahida. So it's so the making the reportage from hot sports is very dangerous. So and what changed since that time? The time of that was 25 years ago in Bosnia, and nowadays in Syria, in Ukraine. So what changed? In your profession?
If you compare the coverage of Bosnia, you had an army, and you had a civilian population. I'm talking about Srebrenica. And you had reporters who was going around. They were not, nobody was hitting them. You had two sides. With Syria, it's dangerous because you have a variety of actors in the same field. I always call Syria as a jungle. You have everyone there. You have Syrian army, you have Russians, you have Iranian groups paid by Iranians, the Shia groups. You have Islamic groups, not only one, but few. So you have all this animal roaming around the jungle, and you as a journalist have to figure out what the hell I'm doing. And especially Syria. I honestly don't think anyone can report Syria. Because if you stand, for example, I have access only to opposition territories, Turkey-controlled areas, which is from Turkish border up to Aleppo. right? But you can go with Turkish army or with Turkey-backed opposition groups. I don't have access to Damascus or Syrian government-controlled areas. So how my reporting can be neutral? It can't. The problem with Syrian war that if you have the media access was so restricted. We rarely hear from what's happening on government-controlled territories. We hear more. Most of the information was coming out from the opposition-held territories. And with all my due respect to opposition and all the civil journalists who were there, I still lack the other side. For example, the coverage of Aleppo, when Aleppo was finally taken by the Syrian government. We've heard about the population stranded in eastern Aleppo, about 300,000 people. Who calculated them? I don't know. We were hearing conflicting reports about how many hospitals are left. But I didn't hear on international channels what is happening in western Aleppo. The information was distorted. So immediately you take one side on another. Unfortunately, the foreign press, the Western press, was given access only to opposition-held territories. Only very few journalists had access to Damascus. Russian journalists, on contrary, had access to the government-held territories. So go figure.
Yeah, is Syria?
I'm from Syria. And in contrast with you, I had access to all the territories. You said that you were in one zone only, and I were in both of those zones. The opposition held, and the Syrian army held, and Kurd held territories, as well as the Turkish held territories. And the question is, how did those terrorists arrive in Syria? Who financed them, and who provided them a corridor so that they could come from the Great Britain, from Turkey, from the Arabic world, from Afghanistan, when they forgot about their own affairs and they decided to attack Syria? Another thing, when the ISIS comes, they seem to be rather selective. I come from Kobani, and my city was demolished completely. It was completely demolished. So I think that you probably got my question. This is a very difficult question. In fact, I cannot answer it, because it's not the journalists who are supposed to be answering that. I cannot prove that ISIS was paid for by some specific countries. I will not be able to prove that al-Nusra was financed by some of the Gulf countries. I cannot prove that the Syrian Islamic groups had money coming from some other country. The only thing that I could say is that when I met with a representative of Jaish al-Islam in Istanbul, he told me that they have had a head office in Riyadh. So why a group that is engaged in war actions in Syria that is saying that it's a Syrian organization has its headquarters in Saudi Arabia? Thank you. That's what I wanted to ask you about. My name is Tahtar Korsebayev. I'm a director from Kazakhstan. First of all, it's a great pleasure to be talking to an intelligent person, and I would say that the audience would agree with me. Thank you for coming. I have two banal questions, not related to the political topic. You are a woman and a journalist. You've chosen this profession. So my question, why did you go into this specific area, war reporting? I would say this is a rare choice for any woman. And then, that's my first question. Second, what is your ideal journalist? Who is your ideal journalist? Listiev or who else? Well, thank you. I'm asked about women being a journalist, a war reporter. And I say that we need to have more women in war areas. Why? Because women see any war differently. When you're in the field, when we're watching each other work, when those are male reporters, they try to be focusing on the techniques of that war. It's very interesting. They're in the theater of those war action. And women, they normally go to villages looking for people. Women are about people, because we're not so much interested in those different types of techniques and strategies of war. I even had a small guidebook when I worked in the east of Ukraine, in Donetsk. At 6 a.m. They would have the machinery coming in from Rostov, trucks with humanitarian cargoes as well. I don't know what those machines were called, not Katyushas, but some strange names, and I would look into my guidebook to see what the names of those machines were. I believe that we need to have more women working in war areas, and I think that there are more women working there now, which is good. Why I chose this? Because someone needs to tell those stories. Someone needs to go to that village in misery to see what is going on there, because it's all about people. And if you go there and you bring a pack of cigarettes or a couple of kilos of sugar and bread, then this is helpful. We're like doctors, journalists working in war areas. They are just like doctors. Sometimes I had to save a grandma who was caught in a shelling, for instance. So there are some journalists for whom I have a lot of respect. Jeremy Bone, my Israeli colleague, will not agree with me, who is the former BBC correspondent on Middle East. Now he's a foreign editor. That's someone whom I'm looking up to, but it's probably the only person. Okay, if I may, I have a question. I'm a provincial journalist, so to say. A rank-and-file person observing things happening in those hotspots. I'm just watching TV to follow all of those events, and I have a question regarding this conflict in Ukraine, Donbass, and the other side. I would say is the same nation, the same people, but at the same time, both sides covered differently. So, do you believe that it could be just like in Korea? They could divide it into northern and southern Korea. This has happened. They've been divided, and then this country will be difficult to unite this country tomorrow. I think that if someone wants to unite Ukraine one day, then that would take years. And this nationalist rhetorics and the hatred rhetorics is getting stronger on both sides, unfortunately. And when I came to Ukraine last time, I was in Zakarpattia, which is a totally different subject regarding national minorities. And then when I talked to the Ukrainian politicians, I was shocked when I asked them, what is it that you're going to do with those people who are in Donbass? I heard that they would think about the filtration camps, to set them up, to decide who supported Ukraine and who supported the separatists. Guys, those are people, and they were caught up in that situation, and they needed to survive. That's what they were trying to do. Any person going to a war area would realize that there is nothing left to those civilians just to struggle for their lives, to make sure their children survive. And you shouldn't put this choice in front of them. Are you for these guys or for these guys? If you want to straighten it out, then at the high political level, wearing your suits and ties, you can figure it out. And these people, leave them alone. And the further you go with the conflict, the more separation and division you get. Unfortunately, in Donbass, they watch the Russian TV. I'm not going to comment on what's going there. No Ukrainian channel is active there. In Ukraine, they watch Ukrainian channels, and we're not going. They're very nationalistic, and for them, people in Donbass do not exist. And when I tell the stories to my colleagues about those grandmas and in underground floors and so on and so forth, I hear from them, why did they go to the referendum? And I ask them, why do you know that they were a part of that referendum? She might have been forced to be a part of that referendum. Don't judge, guys. Guys, why would they judge people like that? Unfortunately, when it comes to coverage, in Ukraine, it's not objective, I would say. It's one-sided. Because, for instance, the separatist territories have interdiction. They've prohibited any entry to the press. They've closed up that area for everyone. It's hard to get in. Living alone storytelling. There is a saying, when you're banging with your head against the wall, you shouldn't regret the bricks. I would say that it's more about the fake stories that are turning into an instrument of some high-level politics. I'm talking about this high-level politics, not the lopsided coverage by one of the sides in the conflict. I'm talking about this like high-level politics. We know that the fakes were actively used even by Bismarck in his policies. How often do you get to face this concrete wall? Does it ever happen to you? And if it does, how do you overcome this? Everything has to be checked and double-checked. Even this chemical attack in Syria, when the politicians said that this was a chemical attack. Well, guys, wait, let's check first. Let's see what tells us about this, that this was a chemical attack, and then we will discuss what was used there. I don't support anyone. I know that Assad's regime used chemical weapons regularly. That was documented, properly documented, but we've mentioned that has been verified by the international experts. However, when some sort of a chemical attack occurs and all of the news agencies right away start talking about it, based on what? Based on things coming from someone, from the insiders, we cannot say, although I like the white casques and however the white helmets, but they are all playing their own game. They're trying to get as many evidence as possible. We cannot take it for granted. We should double-check everything, verify everything. That's about our job. Otherwise, it will get even worse. And therefore, we need to be very tenacious when it comes to checking those facts, because sometimes we might easily yield into the temptation of accepting it just like that, because when people are dying, we have a lot of emotions. I had similar problems with covering eastern Aleppo, because I had information from the blogs of people in real time. However, let's first of all check whether those people are really there. However, no, it never happens. Unfortunately, most of the worldwide channels just tell you, well, here is this person sitting in this underground room, and I cannot check the geolocation. I do not know where he is. And that person is saying that those things are happening at the moment. I don't like this type of work. It's not my style. Did it ever happen when you would be limited in terms of your chances to verify the information, like politicians would impose restrictions? No. You can never make me report on the things that I have not verified. I'm a journalist from Armenia. We have our own conflict. I believe you are very much aware of that, the Nagorno-Karabakh area. Well, imagine there is a group from the third country, from the West, coming. And it seems to be rather calm at the borderline. However, it's not very advantageous for the journalists, because they're looking for some hot stuff. They want to have images, strong images, and they try to make an arrangement with the sides to have some sort of a small shooting at least. And when asked what do you think about it, well, I will not put it like this. I would ask the following question: how frequently do you face a situation like this? Or maybe you have heard about similar stories. Thank you. This is a good question. First of all, congratulations on the revolution. That happens often, unfortunately. I talked to one of the experts recently who worked in Mosul. when Mosul was liberated from ISIS, and I heard similar stories when they just needed to play some sort of a scene. It's unacceptable, of course. However, it does happen. Well, finally, I'm not in the position to blame my colleagues because they need to create some sort of a viral information, because they need to show some movement. The editors want it, and if you don't show that movement, then your story is not adequate, or is not interesting. Then, I don't know, we should recommend finding a different angle to our comments, because I came to this delimitation line. I was there on both sides, and thanks God everything was very tranquil, although the delimitation line is the most dangerous in the world, by the way, the line between Nagorno-Karabakh and Azerbaijan. Shahida, thank you for this wonderful information. Well, certainly we know that war, sex scandals, show business are the programs that get most of the ratings. And how is the British, or how about the British audience? Are they interested in some sort of other types of topics? For instance, are they interested in Central Asia? How would they know that Pakistan is different from Kazakhstan, for instance? Because we don't seem to have any scandals living apart aside the oil and corruption. Yeah, around Central Asia. And I think that the West is more interested in feminism in Kazakhstan. I would like to ask you whether the culture-based programs, shows are popular in the West, or they're just interested in those types of hype and scandals. I will be honest telling you that if you want to be on the news, then something bad must happen. That's a simple answer to your question. Therefore, I started working on BBC World Services on the radio, and I always have radio on. I get up at 6 in the morning, and at 6 I am listening to the newscast, and I always feel like dying after that. Don't start your day like that, because the headlines have an explosion, that's for sure. Then some people were killed, and you get 5 minutes of that hell. And then they try to tell you good morning, so to say. I'm somewhat tired of that, of course. Well, of course, culture is interesting. You have cultural shows and then documentaries. But those are documentaries, normally, as soon as it comes to culture. Culture is not in the news. Or, for instance, if some cultural figure is caught up in the midst of a sex scandal, then, of course, it's on the news. Otherwise, it's outside of the main newscast. The documentaries are subsidized. People are trying to do something, but I think Yevgeny is probably the best person to answer this question, because he's a director, and he's a famous director. He doesn't do a lot of culture stuff, however, I think he has more knowledge on that. How to sell culture. Can we get a microphone, please?
So I just arrived today from LA, where I lived for the last 18 years. United States living in bubble these days. I guess we also have an either scandal with Trump that are going on and on and on. Every day we're starting with Trump tweets and we're ending with anything that coming from White House. Same time, we do having the Weinstein effect, the sexual situation. Unfortunately, Hollywood, from the cultural aspects right now, jumped into the one corner of all this sexual harassment situation, and the cultural aspects are lost. That's another problem. Like Shahida said, what is easy to sell, it's the scandal, or sometimes the war situations.
Harvey Weinstein gave a lot of room to talk about.
Yeah, recently, if you will follow the Cannes had open line for the people who experienced sexual harassment during the festival. It gave a lot of subjects to talk. It gave a lot of opportunity. From another side, it gave opportunity to the women to express themselves. It have a bad and a good things. bad things, that a lot of people using the element of sexual harassment to accuse people who never did it. And there is situations that right now happening that a lot of people, like I know personally the president of Academy of Motion Picture, who was basically accused in the sexual harassment, and John Bailey at some point came with the statement and said it's not happened, and they found that it's not what's happened. So there is a certain element in the sexual harassment aspect that people sometimes using in a negative way. In the same time, it's allowed voices to come out, step in front of the cameras, and tell something that was hidden for ages in a Hollywood machine. So at the end of the day, cultural aspect somehow lost. But what is good, and Shahida mentioned this about documentaries, more and more documentaries on different subjects, cultural subject, war subjects, because we both did war things. I did a movie on Maidan a few years ago in 2015, when I completely told the story of Maidan. Then we both created Syrian story, Cries from Syria, that reconstructed completely all the Syrian situation, where we allowed the voices and the stories that came out of Syria to be told to the world. Because, for example, our media in the United States completely never, and again, never brought anything from 2011 when the revolution started in Syria up until 2015 when the old media in Europe was screaming, wow, the refugees are coming, it's a catastrophe. But nobody knew about these refugees. Who are they? What are they looking? So this media bubble that, for example, Western world or my world of United States living, it was kind of isolated. Actually, Shahida mentioned about human stories. And you know what? When we came to the Syrian people, one of the elements that I experienced, not because I was born in former Russia, I was born in, and I left former Soviet Union in 1991, before it's kind of separated. It's not was a factor of me being Russian. We both experienced one simple thing. They were like, but why you want to tell our story? You neglected us, and you mentioned this. People were feeling that the entire world abandoned Syrian people. So for us, it was establishing the contact and explaining to them, no, nobody abandoned you. We want to tell your story because media not was covering this. So at the end of the day, more and more documentaries were coming to the bigger world. And I will tell you something, in Hollywood, or in the world even, these days we are booming in documentaries. In 2015, when Winter on Fire was running for the Oscars, it was 124 movies submitted for the Oscars. 2016, I'm talking about documentaries. 2016, 138. Last year, in 2017, when Cries from Syria was submitted to the Oscars, it was 170. So it's booming, and specifically with the development of the media, you have right now Netflix, Hulu entered to the market, and Hulu is really hungry to the documentaries, Amazon, you have National Geographic, you have CNN Films, you have HBO, you have more and more outlets looking for documentaries. This is the only way to educate people, and this is the only way to tell the comprehensive story versus the small segments of the news, so people can be educated. People can understand what's happening there. And documentaries can be on a different aspect. It can be cultural aspects of Kazakhstan. It can be cultural aspects of different things in, let's say, in Latin America, or it can be something that covering the certain elements, like we created the Cries from Syria, where we literally reconstructed everything from 2011 step by step up until 2016. We literally ended the movie when the Aleppo was falling. So we reconstructed step by step to educate people. Same like what was done with Winter on Fire about Maidan. We literally reconstructed everything and explained to the world what was happening there. And this actually the only great aspect of the filmmaking, documentary filmmaking. And for example, movie on Maidan, I can tell you interesting thing. In 2017, last year, Venezuela was showing the movie Winter on Fire actually on the streets, in underground, and this is erupted Venezuela against their dictatorship. So that's the effect of documentaries. And for example, I am right now doing a movie on the Pope Francis, actually about Israel and Palestine. I had a conversation with Pope Francis and with the people like Rabbi Skorka and Sheikh Aboud, two different religious aspects, who told me how Pope Francis, because of the propaganda mechanism from both sides, Palestinian and Israeli, not been able in Jerusalem, while he was visiting there, to put together Shimon Peres and Mahmoud Abbas because of the media. So he was forced to pull them into the Vatican Gardens, and then he was able to do this meeting. And how both of the sides were pulling the strings and pulling the Pope on different sides. So it's the media from both sides that were basically creating this effect. It's interesting to learn about these things. So the documentaries is doing a huge educational thing and a cultural thing. So that's why a lot of times journalism these days kind of goes into the documentary thing. And actually, back to the directors, for me, she is my idol in terms of journalism. I learned from her a lot while I was literally on the grounds of... I will tell you a funny thing. 2 years ago, in May, we both met in Atatürk Airport. We met before, but we actually started our journey on Christ from Syria in Atatürk Airport. I flew from States, she flew from Prague, and we actually, like today, actually, we just flew again from Atatürk. I flew from Los Angeles to Atatürk, she's from London to Atatürk, and 2 years ago, we met and we started our journey into the Syrian border. So that's how she took me into the war zone, and she actually taught me how to take source footage and do a real check, fact check, that it's not belongs to this side or this side, and keep the objectivity. So it's amazing how the directors of our days in documentary world can learn from the journalists on a field how to operate, how to understand who is basically whose footage is that, whose side it's taken, and to do the objectivity on the human stories. She taught me how to take somebody's interview, because it was a situation when we interviewed certain people, and Shahida was explaining to me, no, he's not telling the true story. He tells somebody else's story. He's telling you different story because it's not him. And it's interesting how you're learning from the professional journalist being a director of the movie. So that's a great thing that you can learn from the professional journalist being a director.
Yeah, there was one guy about the torture. There was one, because we were talking about the segment on torture in the Assad prisons. So there is one character coming, and we ask him about what kind of torture he was subjected to, and he kind of gives vague answers. And I really don't like the guy. So then we ask him, can you show the traces? Because obviously the way they torture prisoners in the worst prisons in the world, probably, you have some marks. It's like, oh, I don't have any marks, they're gone. Oh, really? From all this horrible stuff which they do to you, they're gone? Forget about it.
And we actually saw
and then actually I saw him talking, sorry to interrupt, I saw him talking to BBC half a year later about torture. Oh my God, how horrible it is. I mean, seriously, man, I mean, if you don't have any single mark, how would I believe you? Because every other person we interviewed who was tortured in Assad prison had marks, horrible marks. But this one got away with it. Fake, fake, fake.
Hello, Shahida. Thank you so much for your performance. I'm representing social partner of the forum, and I would like to, if you allow me, to ask questions not in a professional subject, but in more of a personal one. I have two questions, actually. First one, what is justice for you? And second one, if we may just imagine that your profession is no longer in demand, and if there are no wars in the world, what would you do? What's your passion? What you do other than war journalism?
Right, justice. I don't know what it is. Everyone understands justice differently. And if I had a clear understanding of justice, probably I wouldn't be able to be a reporter. Because then I have a clear understanding of justice. And then I'll have to dictate you my version of justice, which is not my purpose, correct? Because I'm not there to tell you anything. This profession will never go out of fashion. It's like a prostitution. It will always exist. Because war will always exist. People fight. I have 2 boys. And I see it, because they have boys always fight. That's their nature. They're not girls who are sitting and knitting and doing some doll stuff. They want to fight with lightsabers, with the Nerf guns, and that's it. And it will go on. People need to fight. That's why, and our job is to go and report about stories, and for you, for the audiences, to understand that behind every single number of like 5 million refugees, there is a person. There is a mother, there is a child who have a story of their home they left and the things they're going through. And like I'm working on the story of Rohingyas now, we hear about 700,000 people who were crossing border between Burma and Bangladesh within 2 weeks. Imagine, 700,000 people. It's just a number, right? But you go and put face to this number, and then you feel for them. You feel for the women. We hear the rape victims. You go and talk to rape victims, and they tell horrible stories. Stories you want to cry, because you have a fragile woman, very young, very beautiful, who has the courage, being a Muslim woman, has the courage saying the horrible stuff, that she was gang raped for several hours, and she still survived. And she's committed to tell the story so everyone would hear. And this is why I'm there for. To go find her and deliver the message to the world. So we kind of try to stop this thing from happening. So unfortunately, I'll always be in fashion.
Morning, Shahida. Thanks a lot for the job you are doing for us. Volodymyr Dzidjora, charge d'affaires of Ukraine to the Republic of Kazakhstan.
Thank you very much, Shahida, for what you do for all of us, telling us stories, true stories from conflict zones. I'm Volodymyr Dzidjora, charge d'affaires of Ukraine in the Republic of Kazakhstan. I have a question, but before the question, we all perfectly understand that there is no Ukrainian conflict as such. There's a Russian aggression. There was first occupation of Crimea, then aggression of Russia in the east of Ukraine with the military support of Russia. Not only military support, but political and financial of the unlawful military armed groups in East Ukraine. We also understand that the military conflict will be over only when there is legitimate control on the Russia-Ukraine border. The border is closed, when the so-called humanitarian convoys will stop working in Syria, Ukraine. I never thought the humanitarian aid may include shells and other arms. But when that stops, the conflict will be over in just a few months' time. So now with that, my question: when you would take an interview from Turk, you perfectly understand that Turk is an international military criminal. You know that he's a foreign military, he's a mercenary. He's in territory of a certain state, he's committing a military crime. You're a woman, you're a mother, you're a journalist. I've been listening to you very carefully, very attentively, what you're saying now, and you are showing from your coverage in Syria. But as a person and as a woman, don't you have an internal conflict? You have your own beliefs. But when you talk to people like that, what do you feel? When you realize that in front of you sitting is a war criminal, a mercenary, who in some other country's territory is killing people, women, children, because maybe he's psychologically uneven, or he was sent there, he was forced to go there, or he went there for money. For some reason he's there, but in front of you sitting is not a defender of a family, of a motherland, of friends, but a killer, a murderer, who should be in prison. What happens inside of you? Thank you. You know, it's a difficult question. My first meeting with Motorola was in a very unpleasant setting. His bodyguard really hit me very badly. These are unpleasant people. They mostly remind me of, well, gangsters, bandits, rather than some rebel group. But I must say that Givi's battalion, the late Givi's battalion, they were more like Somali pirates rather than those of Motorola. Motorola's people are trained. Those are Russians, professional military people. I was on his testing ground. I saw how they train. It's a completely different level than what I saw with Givi's people. You know, if I were to do news, it would be one thing. But I wanted to do a film that would show that war from a perspective of soldiers on two different sides. That's it. And I had to hear them. My feelings to Motorola, I set him deeply aside, far aside, because he sat down and talked to me. And believe me, it took me a lot of effort to make him sit, to agree to talk, because I, for him, is from some enemy side, and it was a miracle. I could catch him and could sit him down and talk to me. And I had to hear him, because doing a movie about taking of the airport without Motorola wasn't real, because he was the main hero there. Unpleasant, yeah. It was unpleasant to walk around in that airport. It smelled of corpses. It was May, everything was just... and listening Oleg that you saw in that film, because he's also a Russian. I also didn't understand why he was there. But it's not my goal to judge them, to argue with them. My goal is to make them talk. And let them talk of ugly things. But on the other side, I have those wonderful Ukrainian soldiers who are just great, wonderful, who are really used as fodder. But they tell of such good things, and hearing them, you understand who is what in that conflict. It becomes clear from that. But what I feel about that, well, thank you for not killing me. That's what I felt. Another question, not about politics. We're coming close to how we feel, how you feel in conflict zones. My good friend Mickey Schmidt also worked in conflict zones for Israel television, and in times when there was no conflict, he was in Bosnia, he was in Skin Valley. He went drinking. He didn't have that adrenaline rush, and psychologically he was totally depressed. And the second thing, you see such horrible, horrendous things, PTSD. How do you psychologically stay normal? How do you care about your normality when you're in conflict? Thank you. I already talked about PTSD, which unfortunately not all news organizations realize how hard it is. Thank God, today there is more or less mandatory training for journalists who go to conflict zones, at least in techniques of self-security, and good that freelancers can learn about that, and good that there are organizations that issue bulletproof vests and helmets, but no one is really working on PTSD because it's very expensive. But it's very important because lives fall apart, because normally people who smell blood, who smell war, they will go again. It's like recycling over and over. Yeah, a lot of people go drinking. It just doesn't work otherwise. At war, you see, it's vodka whiskey. That's it. I'm honest with you, as is. We worked, well, everywhere I worked, in the evening it starts. Because you go in the morning and then you see that shit again. And that and that and that. But I was lucky. I have 2 kids. And when I come and back home and there's a completely different life there, I switch. I go to routine, school and everything. It's easier for me. But if you don't have anyone back home, that's horrible. Switching is hard. So it's mandatory. You have to work with your therapist. Hello. Hello, my name is Dina Tulepergen. I'm a journalist of evening news on Katika in the state language. Shahida, first of all, thank you very much for being here today. I wanted to thank you for your passion to your job, because for us it's an incentive. We see what you do, we understand that you have to dig digger, that you shouldn't ever give up. So for all of that, thank you very, very much. You're a hero for us. You're a brand. I'll be honest with you. When I first read your name, Shahida Tulaganova, and BBC, I immediately became interested because your name is Shahida. It's very close to us. You know that in Kazakhstan, many mothers and fathers name their daughters Shahida. And there are a few journalists who worked at BBC, at Sashal. When I read Shahida, I felt warm, pleasant. I started taking pride, started looking you up, what you are, who you are. And now my question. In 2009, Special Service of Uzbekistan wrote about you that if Shahida is to be caught, she'd be dead. Now, situation in Uzbekistan is changing, and I wanted to ask you, what does motherland mean to you? Given the situation now in Uzbekistan, do you have any plans to make changes in your geolocation? Or maybe move, opening up a school, a media school, to elevate the Uzbek journalism? Thank you. Thank you. I don't get asked often about Uzbekistan. Thing is that after the Andijan shooting in 2005 in May, I could not go to Uzbekistan. I ended up there 2 days after the shooting, and it just happened so that when all the media was kicked out of there, I was the only person there who said on BBC News what really happened there. And in a month's time, we went back through Kyrgyzstan, through the border, actually crossing in, and we made a movie with my friend and the rest of it, a 10-minute film. That was the only thing available at Andijan. For the time being, I'm very happy that there are changes happening in Uzbekistan, and media is allowed, and some of my colleagues are going back. I, for the time being, am not yet ready for... I'm not only risking my life, I'm also risking lives of my children, who I want to take there and show them what Uzbekistan is for. They have never seen Uzbekistan. I believe that there are things that are of principal importance to me in my professional career when it comes to the Uzbek leadership. That is true independent investigation of what happened in Andijan in 2005, because that was the hardest conflict I got to cover. Worst thing is when people kill their own. And I told myself I will never cover Uzbekistan, because in Uzbekistan I cannot stay unbiased. It was hard for me to see these corpses when I went to people and they told me about these morgues. It was hard for me to see those numbers and city shot. I told myself never. I would never do about Uzbekistan. I consider myself to be a Central Asian. All of Central Asia is my home. I don't make difference between Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan. It's all for me one. I, with pleasure, would love to train journalists, because I think I have such wealth of experience and I do want to share it. If they call me home, I would come with pleasure and will train Uzbek journalists. But I myself will not offer anything, because until I'm given clear guarantees of my safety, I will not risk.
I have a question for clarification. In your point of view, while covering a conflict situation, we see the predominantly fake or real news? Certainly you have a wealth of histories, of stories. Did you ever meet people who are training suicide terrorists? If so, then tell us. If we're to talk about fake news and truthful coverage, it's 50-50. You will never be able to find a truthful coverage watching one channel only. I normally watch several channels at the same time, CNN, BBC, and Russia Today, in order to be able to put together some sort of a picture of what's happening in reality. This like average statistical, because all of them have their own editorial policy. They all have access to certain specific locations, and in order to be able to get the understanding, then you need to watch everything. In terms of the suicide bombers, I've never met them, but I communicated for a long time with a person who trains people in Syria, so that they would be capable in war. That is a person from Russia who is rather young. He had a whole battalion, and they would train those people, primarily the former Soviet Union nationals. It looks like we are done. Thank you very much for your question.